The shame burned in Sarah's chest as her friends laughed about her mother being just the cleaning lady. But when their arrogant history teacher challenged her mother's knowledge about military tactics, something shifted in the woman's posture, something that made a decorated colonel visiting the school immediately snap to attention. Welcome to Interesting Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden valor, sacrifice, and the courage to be underestimated, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe that true heroes often work in silence, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hallways of Lincoln High School as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart past the lockers, her rubber-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished linoleum. At 48, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the corridors like a ghost, cleaning up after teenagers who barely registered her existence. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, her navy blue uniform pressed and spotless despite the nature of her work. To the students, she was just another piece of the school's machinery, as unremarkable as the fluorescent lights or the fire extinguishers. They stepped around her without looking, dropped trash without thinking, lived their teenage dramas as if she weren't there at all. But Maria saw everything. She noticed which kids ate lunch alone, which ones came to school with bruises they tried to hide, which ones were struggling with problems too big for their young shoulders. She had developed an instinct for reading people that went far beyond her custodial duties, though she never spoke unless spoken to, never interfered unless absolutely necessary. Sarah Santos sat in her AP history class, trying to focus on Mr. Patterson's lecture about military strategy in the Iraq War, but her attention kept drifting to the whispered conversations around her. Her classmates were discussing their parents' careers again, a ritual that never failed to make her stomach clench with familiar dread. "My dad's consulting for the Pentagon now," whispered Jessica Chen loud enough for half the class to hear. "Top secret stuff about counterterrorism." "That's cool," replied Marcus Williams. "My mom just got promoted to Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Harrison. She's working on the new defense budget." Sarah slumped lower in her seat, hoping to disappear entirely. These conversations always went the same way, each student trying to outdo the others with their parents' impressive accomplishments, while Sarah remained silent, praying no one would ask about her family. But her luck ran out, as it always did. "What about you, Sarah?" The question came from Jake Morrison, the class president and star quarterback, whose father was a prominent lawyer. His tone carried that particular mixture of curiosity and condescension that Sarah had grown to hate. "You never talk about what your parents do." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The classroom seemed to shrink around her as 20 pairs of eyes turned in her direction. She could lie, she supposed, make something up, but the truth had a way of surfacing eventually in a school this small. "My mom works here," Sarah said quietly, hoping they'd mistake her meaning. "Here." Jake's eyebrows shot up, like as a teacher. Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "She works maintenance." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake's laughter cut through the air like a blade. "Your mom's the janitor?" he said, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "That's so pathetic. I mean, no wonder you're always so quiet. I'd be embarrassed too if my mom spent her days cleaning up other people's messes." A few other students chuckled, not necessarily out of cruelty, but because Jake's laughter was infectious and they didn't want to be on the receiving end of his mockery. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as the familiar shame washed over her. Mr. Patterson, a thin man in his 30s with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually impatient expression, barely looked up from his notes. "Settle down," he said dismissively. "Let's get back to the lesson." But Jake wasn't finished. "I mean, what kind of life goals does someone have to end up pushing a mop around a high school? Did she even graduate?" "That's enough," Mr. Patterson said, but his tone suggested he was more annoyed by the interruption than the cruelty. Sarah stared at her desk, willing herself not to cry in front of everyone. She had endured this kind of humiliation before, but it never got easier. The worst part was that she sometimes wondered if Jake was right. What kind of person settled for a job that made them invisible? At that moment, there was a knock on the classroom door. Mr. Patterson opened it to reveal Maria Santos, holding a work order in her weathered hands. "Excuse me," she said in her soft, accented voice. "The principal asked me to fix the broken window latch before the inspection tomorrow." Mr. Patterson glanced irritably at the window behind his desk where the latch had indeed been hanging loose for weeks. "Fine, but make it quick," he said. "We're in the middle of an important lesson about Operation Iraqi Freedom." Maria nodded and moved quietly to the window, pulling a small toolkit from her cart. Sarah watched her mother work, noticing things she'd observed 1,000 times before. The precise, economical movements, the way her hands seemed to know exactly which tool to use without looking, the careful attention to detail that made every repair perfect the first time. But she also noticed something else, the way her mother's eyes swept the room, cataloging exits and potential threats with the kind of systematic awareness that seemed oddly out of place for a school custodian. Mr. Patterson continued his lecture, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used when he thought he was being particularly insightful. The problem with the Iraq invasion, he was saying, was that the American military completely misunderstood urban warfare tactics. They went in with conventional strategies against an unconventional enemy. Any competent commander should have anticipated the insurgency. Maria's hands paused for just a moment on the window latch, but she didn't turn around. Mr. Patterson warmed to his subject, clearly enjoying his own expertise. The truth is, American military leadership has always been overly reliant on superior firepower rather than actual strategic thinking. Take the battle for Fallujah, a complete tactical disaster that could have been avoided with proper intelligence and cultural understanding. This time, Maria did turn around. Her expression was calm, but Sarah noticed a subtle shift in her posture, a straightening that suggested controlled tension. "Excuse me," Maria said quietly. "I don't mean to interrupt." Mr. Patterson looked annoyed. "What is it?" "You mentioned Fallujah," Maria said, her voice still soft but carrying a new quality that Sarah had never heard before. "Which battle were you referring to? There were 2 major operations there." Mr. Patterson blinked, clearly surprised that the janitor was engaging with his lesson. "The first one, obviously, Operation Vigilant Resolve in 2004, a complete failure of planning." Maria nodded slowly. "I see. And what do you think should have been done differently?" The question caught Mr. Patterson off guard. He had expected deference, maybe embarrassment at overstepping her place. Instead, he was facing what sounded suspiciously like a challenge. "Well," he said, his tone becoming more condescending, "anyone with basic military knowledge would know that you can't fight an urban insurgency with conventional tactics. The Americans should have focused on winning hearts and minds instead of just bombing everything in sight." Sarah watched her mother's face carefully. There was something happening here that she didn't understand, a tension building beneath the surface of what seemed like a casual conversation. "Hearts and minds," Maria repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that's important, but what about the tactical considerations? Urban warfare requires very specific strategies for room clearing, civilian evacuation, supply line protection. How would you have handled the insurgent sniper positions in the industrial district?" Mr. Patterson's confidence began to waver. Maria asked, still in that same quiet voice. "The cement factory or the cultural center?" The factory, obviously. Higher ground, better sight lines." Maria shook her head slowly. "The cultural center. The factory was a diversion. The real command structure was operating out of the mosque complex behind the cultural center, using the civilians as human shields. You clear the factory first, you alert them to your presence and give them time to escape or reinforce." The classroom had gone completely silent. Students were looking back and forth between the history teacher and the janitor as if watching a tennis match, but Sarah could see that her mother was winning. Mr. Patterson's face had begun to flush red. "I don't think a cleaning lady is qualified to lecture me about military strategy." Something shifted in Maria's eyes, a hardness that Sarah had never seen before, like steel beneath still water. "You're right," Maria said calmly. "I'm just a cleaning lady. What would I know about Fallujah?" But as she turned back to the window, she continued talking, her voice conversational but carrying clearly through the silent room. "Of course, I wouldn't know that the insurgents were using a network of tunnels between the buildings, or that they had RPG teams positioned on the rooftops of the residential blocks 3 streets over. I couldn't possibly understand why the initial assault had to be delayed 48 hours because of intelligence indicating a chemical weapons cache in the hospital basement." Mr. Patterson stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Maria continued working on the window latch as she spoke. "And I certainly wouldn't know that the real breakthrough came when someone realized the enemy was using the minaret of the old mosque as a communications hub, or that the successful resolution required a joint operation between Marines, Army Rangers, and, well, some units that don't officially exist." She tested the latch, satisfied with her work, and began packing up her tools. "But you're absolutely right," she said, looking directly at Mr. Patterson. "I'm just here to fix windows. I couldn't possibly know anything about military tactics." The silence stretched on for long seconds. Then, from the back of the classroom came a voice Sarah didn't recognize. "Excuse me." Everyone turned to see a man in his 50s standing in the doorway, wearing a crisp military dress uniform with more ribbons and medals than Sarah had ever seen in real life. His presence immediately commanded attention in a way that Mr. Patterson's never had. "I'm Colonel Harrison," he said, stepping into the room.
I'm here for the Career Day presentation, but I seem to have gotten lost." His eyes swept the room and landed on Maria, who had gone completely still. "Ma'am," he said, and Sarah noticed his voice carried a tone of respect that seemed oddly out of place for addressing the school janitor. "I couldn't help overhearing your comments about Fallujah." Maria met his gaze steadily. "I was just fixing a window, sir." Colonel Harrison studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah saw something pass between them, a recognition that went beyond words. "Your accent," he said slowly. "Colombian?" "Yes, sir. And your knowledge of urban warfare tactics in Iraq. That's very specific knowledge for a civilian." Maria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I read a lot of books." Colonel Harrison nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. "I'm sure you do. May I ask your name?" For the first time since Sarah had known her, her mother seemed uncertain. "Maria Santos." "Santos," Colonel Harrison repeated, as if testing the name. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Maria Santos from the Colombian Army? 7th Special Forces Brigade?" The toolkit slipped from Maria's hands, hitting the floor with a clatter that sounded deafening in the silent classroom. Mr. Patterson looked confused. "I don't understand. What's going on?" Colonel Harrison ignored him. His attention focused entirely on Maria. "Commander Santos," he said, and Sarah noticed he was now standing slightly straighter, his posture more formal. "I wasn't sure it was you at first, but the way you described the Fallujah operation, you were there, weren't you?" Maria's composure finally cracked. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as if she were setting down a weight she'd been carrying for years. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Not that long," Colonel Harrison replied. "Your unit's performance in Iraq was legendary. The Ghost Battalion, they called you. Joint operations with American forces, counterinsurgency work that saved thousands of lives." Sarah felt the world tilting around her. Ghost Battalion? Her mother had been in the military? Colonel Harrison turned to address the stunned classroom. "Students, you have no idea who you're looking at. Commander Santos led one of the most effective special operations units in the Iraq conflict. Her battalion was responsible for dismantling insurgent networks throughout the Sunni Triangle." He looked back at Maria with something approaching awe. "The operation you described, the mosque communications hub, the tunnel networks. You didn't read about that in a book. You were there. You planned it," he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I've been taking care of my daughter," Maria replied firmly. "That's what matters." Sarah stared at her mother, seeing her as if for the first time. The woman she'd been embarrassed by, ashamed of, was someone whose actions had been studied by military academies. Jake Morrison, who had started this whole conversation with his cruel mockery, looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Mr. Patterson seemed to be struggling to process what he'd just heard. But you're a janitor. You clean toilets and mop floors." Maria looked at him with something that might have been pity. "And you teach history without understanding it. We all have our jobs, Mr. Patterson." Colonel Harrison stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, the United States military owes you a debt of gratitude. What you and your unit accomplished in Fallujah, in Ramadi, in places that are still classified, it changed the entire course of the counterinsurgency. That was then," Maria said simply. "This is now." She began gathering her tools again, her movements precise and economical. Sarah watched, understanding now that the efficiency she'd always admired in her mother wasn't just about cleaning. It was military training, discipline that had never left her. "Why?" Colonel Harrison asked. "Why are you here, doing this work?" Maria paused, her eyes finding Sarah across the room. "Because my daughter needed a stable home more than the world needed another soldier. Because sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight every day, quietly, for the people you love." The bell rang, but no one moved. The entire class sat frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She walked across the room to where her mother stood, suddenly seeing everything differently. The way her mother carried herself, the quiet authority in her voice, the careful way she observed everything around her. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "why didn't you ever tell me?" Maria's expression softened. "Because I wanted you to know me as your mother, not as a soldier. That part of my life was about war. This part is about love." Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. "If I may, Commander, the Army is always looking for experienced officers in training positions. Your expertise in urban warfare, your leadership experience." Maria shook her head. "Thank you, Colonel, but no, my mission now is here." She looked around the classroom, meeting the eyes of students who had dismissed her as invisible just minutes before. Besides, she added with a slight smile, someone has to keep these kids safe. You'd be surprised how much intelligence you can gather just by listening while you work. As Maria pushed her cart toward the door, she paused beside Mr. Patterson's desk. For what it's worth, she said quietly, your heart is in the right place. You want to teach these kids about the costs of war, about making better decisions than the generations before them. That's important work too. She looked out at the classroom full of teenagers. Just remember that everyone has a story. The person you dismiss as unimportant might be the one who changes everything. After she left, the classroom remained silent for several minutes. Students looked at each other with new understanding, processing the revelation that someone they'd completely overlooked was actually someone whose actions had shaped history. Jake Morrison was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe I called her pathetic. Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time in years she stood tall. My mother, she said clearly, is the strongest person I know. She gave up everything to make sure I had a better life than she did. That's not pathetic, that's heroic. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. Your mother is right, young lady. The most important battles are often fought by people no one ever sees, for reasons no one ever knows. He looked around the classroom. I came here to talk to you about military careers, but I think Commander Santos just taught you something more important. Real strength doesn't need to be seen. Real courage doesn't need applause. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to be invisible so that someone else can shine. That afternoon, Sarah found her mother in the supply closet, organizing cleaning supplies with the same methodical precision she now understood came from military training. Mom, Sarah said, I owe you an apology. Maria looked up from her inventory. For what? For being ashamed of you, for wishing you were something else. Maria set down the bottle of floor cleaner she'd been holding and really looked at her daughter. Sarah, you have nothing to apologize for. I made choices that were hard for you to understand. I never explained them because I thought it would be easier if you could just see me as your mother. But you were a commander. You led soldiers. You fought in Iraq. Yes, I was, and I was good at it. But being your mother is more important than anything I ever did in the military. Sarah shook her head. But you gave up so much. Your career, your rank, everything. Maria smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her in years. I didn't give up anything that mattered. I traded one mission for another. The first one was about protecting my country. This one is about protecting you. Don't you miss it? The respect, the authority? Maria considered this for a moment. Sometimes, but respect isn't something you wear on your sleeve, Mija. It's something you earn through your actions every day. And authority? Real authority comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. She gestured around the small supply closet. I know this doesn't look impressive, but I've kept this school safe for 5 years. I've helped kids who were struggling, stopped problems before they became crises, made sure everyone who walks through these doors has a clean, safe place to learn. But people don't see that, they don't appreciate it. Some people don't, Maria agreed. But you do, now, and that's what matters to me. Sarah felt tears starting to form. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. You're 17 years old. You're supposed to be figuring out who you are and what matters to you. I never expected you to understand my choices until you were ready to. Maria reached out and touched her daughter's face gently. Besides, maybe it's better that you learn to be strong on your own first. Now you know that your worth doesn't depend on what other people think of your family. Over the following weeks, things changed at Lincoln High School. The story of Maria Santos spread through the hallways, taking on almost mythical proportions. Students who had never noticed her before began greeting her in the halls. Teachers started showing her more respect. Even the principal made a point of acknowledging her contributions to the school. But Sarah noticed that her mother remained exactly the same. She still did her job with quiet efficiency, still helped anyone who needed it, still remained largely invisible to those who weren't paying attention. Doesn't it bother you? Sarah asked one day as they walked home together, that it took a decorated colonel to make people see who you really are? Maria shrugged. People see what they're ready to see. I've been the same person all along. If they needed Colonel Harrison to tell them that says more about them than it does about me. But now everyone wants to talk to you, ask you about the war, and I answer their questions politely and then go back to work, Maria said. My job hasn't changed just because people know my story. Sarah studied her mother's profile as they walked. You really don't need their approval, do you? No, Maria said simply. I stopped needing other people's approval the day I decided what was truly important to me. That evening, as Sarah worked on her homework, she could hear her mother in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. It was the same tune she'd hummed for years. but Sarah heard it differently now, not as the background noise of a boring domestic life, but as the sound of someone who had found peace with her choices. When Colonel Harrison returned to the school the following month for a formal career day presentation, he made a point of finding Maria before his talk. "Commander," he said, "I've been thinking about our conversation, your decision to leave the military, to choose this life. I understand it better now." Maria looked up from the bulletin board she was updating. "Oh, my daughter is about Sarah's age. She's been struggling in school, acting out, getting into trouble. I keep thinking that maybe if I'd spent more time being her father instead of being a soldier, things might be different." Maria nodded. "It's never too late to change your priorities, Colonel. Maybe, but you made that choice when it mattered most. Your daughter is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Maria said. "Sarah is going to do things I never dreamed of. She's going to change the world in ways that matter." During his presentation to the students, Colonel Harrison told them about different military careers, about serving their country, about the honor of wearing the uniform, but he ended with something unexpected. "The most important thing I can tell you," he said, "is that service comes in many forms. Some people serve in uniform, some in classrooms, some in hospitals, some in ways you might never notice. The value of that service isn't measured by the recognition it receives, but by the impact it has on individual lives." He looked directly at Sarah. "Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to be invisible, who sacrifice recognition for something more important. Those are the people who really change the world." After the presentation, Jake Morrison approached Sarah by her locker. He looked uncomfortable, unsure of himself in a way she'd never seen before. "Sarah," he said, "I wanted to apologize for what I said about your mom, for the way I treated you. I had no idea." "You shouldn't apologize because you found out she was a commander," Sarah said. "You should apologize because what you said was cruel, regardless of who she was." Jake nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right. I'm sorry. For all of it." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. "Apology accepted. But Jake, next time you want to judge someone, maybe get to know them first." That night, Sarah sat with her mother on their small apartment's balcony, looking out over the city lights. "Mom," she said, "what do you want me to do with my life?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to find something that matters to you and do it with everything you have, whether that's being a doctor or a teacher or a soldier or something I've never even thought of. What if I wanted to join the military? Follow in your footsteps? Then I would support you completely. But make sure it's your choice, not just because you think it would make me proud. Would it make you proud?" Maria smiled. "Sarah, you could spend your whole life cleaning floors and I would be proud of you, as long as you did it with integrity and kindness. Pride isn't about what you do, it's about who you are." Sarah leaned against her mother's shoulder, understanding for the first time the depth of the sacrifice that had been made for her. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, Mia. More than any medal or commendation or recognition could ever mean to me." As they sat in comfortable silence, Sarah thought about heroes and sacrifices, about the difference between being seen and being important. She thought about her mother, who had traded a legendary military career for the quiet dignity of raising a daughter well, and she understood that true strength wasn't about commanding respect from strangers. It was about earning love from the people who mattered most, and being willing to be invisible to the world if it meant being everything to someone who needed you. Maria Santos had been a commander, a leader of soldiers, a tactical genius whose operations were studied in military academies around the world. But her greatest victory wasn't won on any battlefield. It was won in the quiet moments of everyday life, in the choice to be present when her daughter needed her most. Some heroes wear uniforms and carry weapons. Others carry mops and push cleaning carts through empty hallways, protecting in ways that no one sees, fighting battles that no one knows about, winning victories that will never make headlines. Both kinds of heroes matter, but only one kind gets to tuck you in at night and help with your homework and cheer you on at graduation. Maria Santos had chosen to be that kind of hero, and in the end that choice made all the difference. The janitor's secret wasn't just that she had been a commander. It was that she had chosen love over legacy, presence over prestige, and her daughter's future over her own past. That's the kind of secret worth keeping, and the kind of hero worth celebrating, even if the celebration happens quietly, in the grateful heart of the child who was loved enough to be chosen every single day.